Hello and welcome back to the QGIS video tutorials brought to you by mangomap.com. You're watching Module 5, Creating Vector Data. Creating maps using existing data is just the beginning. In this module, you'll learn how to modify existing vector data and create new data sets entirely. Creating a new vector data set. The data that you use has to come from somewhere. For most common applications, the data exists already. But the more particular and specialized the project, the less likely it is that the data will already be available. In such cases, you'll need to create your own data. The goal for this part of the module is to create a new vector data set. So let's take a look at the layer creation dialog. Before you can add new vector data, you need a vector data set to add it to. In our case, we're going to begin by creating a new data set entirely rather than editing an existing one. Therefore, you'll need to define your own new data set first. And to do that, we use the new vector dataset button, which is up here in the layer menu. So we go to new and we'll say add new shapefile. For this exercise, we're going to add a new polygon layer, and you can see down here that by default each new dataset has an attribute of ID. We're going to add one additional property to the attribute table called name, and it's going to be text data, and we'll keep the default value width of 80. So now if I press that add to the attribute list, we can now see that we have two attributes. So I'm going to press OK. It's now going to prompt me to save it. So we're going to call this new data set score properties. And as you can see, the score properties layer has now been added to my legend. I'm going to drag it up to the top here. Data sources. When you create new data, it obviously has to be about objects that really exist on the ground. Therefore, you'll need to get your information from somewhere. There are many different ways to obtain data about objects. For example, you could use a GPS to capture points in the real world and then import that data into QGIS afterwards. Or you could use survey points using a theodolite and enter the coordinates manually to create new features. Or you could use the digitizing process to trace objects off a remote sensing data, such as satellite imagery or aerial photography. For our example, you'll be using the digitizing approach. Sample raster data are provided, so you'll need to import them as necessary. So we're going to import a raster layer. So we'll go to the Add Raster Layer button, and we're going to get this one that's in the Exercise Data Raster folder, and we'll open it up. Now, let's move it down to the bottom, and for the time being, let's turn off all of the other layers apart from the raster and our school buildings. In order to begin digitizing, you'll need to enter edit mode. GIS software commonly requires this to prevent you from accidentally editing or deleting imported data. Edit mode is switched on or off individually for each layer. To enter edit mode for the score properties layer, we need to click on score properties, and then we click on the toggle editing button up here that looks like a small pencil. If you can't see the editing toolbars, go into view and select on the toolbars panel down here, and look in here for the digitizing toolbar, so we can see that it's already checked in this case. As soon as you're in editing mode, you'll see that the digitizing tools are now active. We can see them up the top here. So let's take a look at the tools we have available. We have the Add feature, Move feature, Node tool, Delete selected, Cut features, Copy features, and Paste features, and also the Save Layer Edits button over here on the left. Okay, we're going to jump straight in and we're going to add a new feature. So to begin digitizing, we need to click on the Add Feature button up in the editing toolbar. So that's this one here. And we're going to begin digitizing straight away. You'll notice that the mouse cursor has become a crosshair. This allows you to more accurately place the points you'll be digitizing. Remember that even if you're using the digitizing tool, you can still zoom in and out on the map by rolling the mouse wheel, and you can pan around by holding down the mouse wheel and dragging the map. The first feature that we're going to digitize is the athletics field. So let's zoom in so we can more clearly see the athletics field. And to begin digitizing, we just click on the first point, move the mouse to the next point and click again, click again, click again as we draw the outline of the sports field. Once we're happy that we've drawn it, we right click, and we'll then have a window pop up where we can enter the attribute data. So let's put that ID in as 1, and we're going to give it a name, athletics field. Press OK. We've now digitized our first feature. Now remember, if you made a mistake while digitizing a feature, you can always edit it after you're done creating it. If you've made a mistake, You can continue digitizing until you're done creating the feature. Then what we can do is we can select the feature using the select single feature button up here at the top. We'll select one feature, and then we've got some options up here on the top of how we can edit it. So the first one we can do is move. So we can move the feature to a different location. The other one we have is the node tool. Using the node tool, we can select on one of the nodes that's on the feature and we can change its position. And lastly, we have the delete feature button. Now I'm going to do undo so we get our feature back, and as we can see it's back on the screen now. And one last thing to remember, when we add a new feature, each feature needs to have a unique ID. We gave this feature an ID of 1, so the logical thing to do is when we create the next feature we'll give it an ID of 2 and so on. But what's important is each ID needs to be unique. So in conclusion, now you know how to create features. This course doesn't cover adding point features because that's not really necessary once you've worked with more complicated features like lines or polygons. Points you'll be able to figure out for yourself. It works in exactly the same way except that you only click once where you want the point to be. Give it attributes as usual and then the feature is created. Knowing how to digitize is important because it's a very common activity in GIS programs. So what are we going to be looking at next? Features in GIS aren't just pictures, but objects in space. For example, adjacent polygons know where they are in relation to one another. This is called topology. In the next lesson, or the next part of this lesson, you'll see an example of why this can be useful. Feature topology. Topology is a useful aspect for vector data layers because it minimizes errors such as overlaps or gaps. For example, if two features share a border and you edit the border using topology, then you won't need to edit the first one feature, then another, and carefully line up the borders so they match. Instead, you can edit their shared border and both features will change at the same time. The objective for this part of the lesson is to understand topology using examples. So next we're going to be taking a look at snapping. Before we do, let's just save the changes that we made to the school properties, the area that we digitized here. So I'm going to press the edit button and, we need to press the school properties first, turn off editing. It's now going to ask me if I want to save that layer. So I'm going to press save. That layer is now saved. Now, for snapping, to make topological editing easier, it's best if you enable snapping. This will allow your mouse cursor to snap to other objects while you digitize. To turn on snapping, we go to Settings, Snapping Options, and for the next part of the example, we're going to use the Rural Farms layer. So I'm going to check that box. I'm going to go to Pixels, and I'm going to change the pixel value to 4. This means that it will snap when the cursor gets within 4 pixels of another point. For this example, we're also going to use the Advanced Digitizing toolbar that you can see up here. If this isn't currently visible inside your desktop client, just go to View, Toolbars, and activate it here in Advanced Digitizing. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to add an extra farm to the farms layer. So first, I'm just going to go and change the style. You can probably remember from the previous lesson that we changed the style so there were no outlines around the farms. For the digitizing now, we need to be able to see where the individual farms are. So I'm going to turn the lines back on. And now we're going to navigate, and we're going to navigate to the area that I'm going to be digitizing. I'm also going to change the layers. Let's turn the raster off that we were using before, and let's turn back on the building and urban areas that we were looking at when we were making the map previously. So let's go to the rural area. You can see the pen to the left, which means editing's already active, and we're now going to add a new feature. So I'm going to click on Add Feature. Now, if you watch the cursor will now snap when I get close to an existing feature in an adjacent farm. So I can go 1, and we're going to digitize this new farm, and as you can see, it will snap to other features that are in the same data set. So it will snap to the boundaries of the other farms, but it won't snap to features that are in other data sets. So we'll manually draw the edge around here. I'm going to leave a little bit of a boundary, and we'll go around the edge to continue drawing this feature. Okay, and there we go. And as soon as I right click to say that I've finished the feature, you can see here that the form automatically pops up. So as before, we have to give it a unique ID. Now this layer already has a lot of farms, so just to be on the safe side, I'm just going to put a really high number before I save it. And that feature has now been saved. Now, if whilst we were digitizing we made any mistakes, we can also use the undo buttons at the top here to remove the feature it has added. So we can see I press the undo button and it's now been removed. If I press add feature again, let's go back in and add it one more time. So we'll just quickly, you can see the pointer snapping to those other features. And let's just roughly draw this in here. And we've added the new feature. Again, we'll come up with a form. Let's put 999 as the ID again. Next, let's take a look at fixing topology errors. Topology errors aren't always immediately visible. So we're going to look at some errors here on the rural layer. So before we begin, I'm just going to change the symbology so it'll be more clearly visible. I'm going to change back to a simple fill, and I'm going to make the fill just a little bit darker so we can easily see where the errors are. So we'll press OK, and we've changed the fill color. And I'm also going to change the transparency. This will allow us to see whether we have any features that are overlapping each other. So I'm going to change the transparency to 50%. And let's turn off editing for this layer as well. Press save again. And we're going to zoom out and we're going to go back to the area where we added the new farm previously. And we're going to look to see an area where we have some topology errors. So you can see this clear area here. Now, why is this area a different shade to the rest? Now remember, we just set 50% transparency on this layer. Now with this rural layer, the farms layer, there are actually features that are laid on top of each other. We have large farms, and each larger farm is split into smaller farmsteads. So the lines that we can see here on top are the smaller farmsteads. Now the lighter area that we can see here is a gap where the original digitizing wasn't done correctly. So now we're going to attempt to fix. So let's enable editing again for the rural layer. And now we're going to select the node tool. And we're going to move some of these nodes for a feature so they snap, so we can close this gap that we have here. And as you can see, let's turn off editing to make it a little bit more clear. We've now closed that gap that we saw previously on the farms layer. Advanced editing tools. Now that we've looked at some of the basic tools for digitizing, let's take a look at some of the more advanced tools. Now for this one, we're going to use the buildings layer. So let's turn on editing mode for the buildings layer, and let's zoom in to some of the buildings. So we have a building here. The first tool that we're going to look at is the simplify tool. Now the simplify tool, as its name suggests, is used to simplify a feature. So let's click the tool, and then we click on the feature that we wish to simplify, and you'll see that as we move the tolerance button here, the feature becomes simplified. If we press OK, it will modify the feature and simplify its outline and its vertices. So I'm going to undo that. The next tool is the add ring tool, and this is used to cut a ring out of an existing feature. So let's draw a feature inside this building, and when we right click, we'll see that we've now cut a ring out of this feature. Now if we want to remove that ring, we go here and we use the delete ring tool, and when we click on one of the vertices, the ring is then removed. The next tool we're going to look at here is the add part tool. Now to add a part to an existing feature, to make it a multi-part feature, we first click on the select single feature tool, we select a feature, then we click on the add part tool, and we draw another feature outside of the existing one, and we now have a multi-part feature. Now if we would like to delete one of the parts in that feature, we can do that using the delete part tool. Now if we want to remove one of those parts, we just click on one of the vertices in the part that we want to remove, and the additional part will be removed. Next, let's take a look at the reshape feature tool. If we click on reshape feature, we can click anywhere within an existing feature, and then we can click outside, and we can click back inside the feature, and then when we right click, that additional section will be added or will be appended onto the feature. The next tool that we're going to look at is the split features. So let's activate the tool. Splitting features is really easy. We just draw a line through the feature that we want to split. Right click, and now this has been divided into two separate features. Now if we would like to merge those two features back again, we just hold down the control key and press the mouse in order to select the two parts that we want to merge, and then we click on the button up here, the Merge Selected Features tool. It will also ask us to merge the attributes. I'll just press OK, and we can see that this has now been merged back into one single feature. So in conclusion, topology editing is a powerful tool that allows you to create and modify objects quickly and easily while ensuring that they remain topologically correct. So what's next? Now you know how to digitize the shape of the objects easily, but adding the attributes is still a bit of a headache. In the next lesson, we'll show you how to use forms so that attribute editing is simpler and more effective.